The nurse handed me a phone that wasn't mine. She said someone had left it in the 4 bay number 7, my bay, and did I know whose it was? I looked at the cracked case. The blue phone case with the tiny scratch on the corner from when it hit the kitchen tile last November. I had watched it fall. I had watched him pick it up and laugh about it. It was my husband's phone. I held it in hands that still had the 4-needle taped to the back. My fingers were cold the way they always got cold during treatment. The kind of cold that starts in your blood and works outward. I turned the phone over once, twice, and then the screen lit up on its own because someone was calling. The name on the screen was Priya. I did not know anyone named Priya. By the end of this story, you will understand exactly why I did what I did next, and you will not be able to judge me for it. I let it ring. 7 rings. 8. The call died. And then a text came through immediately after, the way texts do when someone realizes the call isn't being answered and they panic. I read it. I read it twice. And then I sat very still in bay number 7 with my 4 dripping and the machine beeping and the sound of the hospital going on around me like nothing had happened, like the floor hadn't just opened up beneath a woman who had spent the last 4 months trying to stay alive. The text said, "Is she still at chemo? Did you talk to the lawyer today? Let me tell you something about the moment your entire life becomes a before and an after. It doesn't feel the way movies say it feels. There's no dramatic music. There's no slow motion. There's just a Tuesday afternoon in a cancer treatment center and a text message on a phone that doesn't belong to you, and a nurse somewhere down the hall asking a different patient if they need more blankets. My name is Dana. I was 37 years old. I had stage 3 breast cancer. I had been married to Marcus for 9 years. And for 4 months, the 4 months I had spent losing my hair, losing weight, losing sleep, counting my white blood cells like currency, my husband had apparently been planning a life without me. Not planning to leave me after I recovered. Planning to leave me while I was still in the fight. Stay with me, because what I found next made this text message look like a warm-up. Marcus had come to every single chemo session for the first 2 months. He sat in the chair beside me. He held my hand through the bad ones. He drove me home when I couldn't see straight. He told me in the parking lot of that hospital, under the yellow lights at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, that he had married me for better and for worse, and this was just the worst part, and they would get through it together. He said together. I remember thinking that was the most married thing anyone had ever said to me. By month 3, the visits got shorter. He was busy, he said. Work was demanding. The commute was killing him. I told him it was okay. I told him I understood. I had a friend who drove me on Tuesdays and my sister on Fridays, and I made it work because that is what sick people do. They make it work so the healthy people don't feel too burdened. I made it easy for him. I made it so easy. By month 4, he had stopped coming entirely. But he still texted, still called, still asked how the numbers looked and whether the doctor seemed encouraged. He still came home every night. He still slept in our bed. He still made coffee in the mornings and left a cup on my side of the counter. I thought he was struggling. I thought he was scared. I thought this was what grief looked like on a man who didn't know how to process the possibility of losing someone. I was wrong about all of it. His phone rang again while it was still in my hand. Priya again. This time I answered. I didn't say hello. I just held the phone to my ear. And a woman's voice said, "Marcus?" The venue confirmed. "They have the date open. We need to put the deposit down today or we lose it." I did not speak. She said, "Marcus, are you there?" I said, "He's not here." Silence. The particular kind of silence that has a shape to it. Then she said, "Who is this?" And I said, "I'm his wife." "Who are you?" She hung up. I sat with that phone for 41 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall, the big round clock above the nurse's station that I had stared at through 100 hours of treatment, counting down the minutes until I could go home. I sat with his phone, and I went through it the way you go through something when you already know what you're going to find, and you're just collecting evidence for a reality you can't yet hold in your body. There were 214 text messages between Marcus and Priya. I did not read all of them. I read enough. They had met 8 months ago. A work conference in Phoenix. She was a consultant his company had hired. It started as friendly texts, professional, then warm, then something that crossed a line so gradually that maybe he told himself it wasn't crossing at all. The first time he said, "I love you" to her in a text was the same week I got my diagnosis. Read that again. The same week I sat in a doctor's office and heard the words "malignant" and "treatment plan" and "we caught it, but we need to act fast." My husband was texting another woman that he loved her. I am not going to tell you I didn't feel anything reading that. I am going to tell you the truth. I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the four. I felt the specific coldness of understanding something about your own life that you can never unknow. That coldness doesn't leave. It doesn't get warm again. It just becomes part of your temperature. But that wasn't the bomb. The bomb was in a separate thread. A thread between Marcus and a man named Derek who turned out to be his college roommate. 3 weeks before I found that phone in Bay 7, Marcus had texted Derek the following words. "She's not going to make it past spring anyway. I'm not going to wait around for the inevitable. I deserve to live my life." She was fighting cancer. He was picking a wedding venue. I want you to feel the weight of that sentence. He had decided I was going to die. He had decided that before the doctors had decided it, before the scans had decided it, before my own body had decided it. He had looked at his sick wife and done the math and concluded that the kindest thing for himself was to start over while I was still in treatment. He was not waiting for me to die. He was moving on from a woman he had already buried in his mind. I put the phone down on the tray beside my 4-bag. I looked at the ceiling. There is a water stain in the shape of something like a bird on the ceiling of Bay 7. I had noticed it before. I stared at it now. And here is the thing I am ashamed of. My very first thought was not anger. My very first thought was, I should have been more. I should have been easier. Less sick. Less frightening. Less expensive. Less of a burden. Less of a problem for a man who had decided problems should be traded in for better models. My second thought was rage so clean and cold and total that it felt almost like relief. I had been blaming myself for a man who was booking wedding venues while I lost my hair on a hospital pillow. I called my sister from my own phone. I said 4 words. I said, "I need you now." She was there in 22 minutes. She walked into Bay 7 and looked at my face and said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then she said, "What happened?" Not a question, a statement. She already knew from my face that something had cracked open that could not be closed. I showed her the texts. She read them. All of them. She read the one from Derek's thread last. She set the phone down. She looked at the ceiling. The bird stain. She said, "Okay, don't touch anything. Don't delete anything. Don't confront him yet." My sister works in family law. What I did not do, and this is the part that people later judged me for, and I understood their judgment even as I disagreed with it. What I did not do was confront Marcus that night. He picked me up at 4:15. He had his own phone back by then. The nurse had returned it to him when he came to get me. He said he must have left it in the rush, said he was sorry, asked if it had been a problem. I said it had not been a problem. I got in the car. He asked how the session went. I said the usual. Tired. Nauseous. The doctor seemed cautiously optimistic about the numbers. He nodded. He put on the radio. He drove home on the same route we had driven 400 times. I looked out the window at the 6 p.m. sky, and I thought about the wedding venue deposit. I thought about the word inevitable. I thought about a man who could sit beside a woman with a needle in her arm and decide, quietly and privately, that she was already over. I let him make dinner. I let him pour me water with lemon the way I liked it. I let him sit across from me at the table where we had eaten 9 years of meals, and I watched his face for anything. Any crack, any guilt, any shadow of the man who had chosen someone else. And I saw nothing but ordinary Tuesday evening. That was the most terrifying part. Not the betrayal, the ease of it, but what I found in his home office 3 days later made the text look like nothing. My sister had a plan, and the plan required patience I did not naturally possess. But I had learned patience in a way I had not expected. You learn a very specific kind of patience in a cancer ward. You learn to sit with uncertainty. You learn to not demand answers from situations that are not ready to give them yet. You learn that your body is doing something enormous and invisible, and you cannot rush it. I used that same patience on Marcus. For 9 days, I was the same wife he thought he had. I slept in the same bed. I asked about his work. I laughed at the right times. I hid the fact that every moment in his presence felt like being underwater, like smiling through something that was slowly filling my lungs. My sister had contacted her colleague, a divorce attorney named Sandra whose reputation was that she left nothing on the table. Sandra had reviewed the texts. Sandra had reviewed our finances, which my sister walked me through with the careful precision of someone defusing something. Marcus had opened a joint savings account with Priya 4 months ago. He had moved $62,000 out of our shared account in small increments, under the amount that triggers automatic bank alerts. $62,000. While I was in chemotherapy, while I was calculating whether we could afford the anti-nausea medication that wasn't fully covered by insurance. The deposit for the venue, a garden venue 40 minutes outside the city, had come out of that account last week. It was a Saturday venue booking. Garden ceremony, the website said. Maximum 150 guests. They had beautiful photos of an arbor covered in white flowers. I looked at those photos for a long time. I am not proud of what I felt looking at them. I am not proud of the specific and petty satisfaction I felt imagining those flowers rotting on the ground. I am not proud of the part of me that wanted to be the reason that venue never got used. But I am telling you the truth because that is the only thing this story is worth. On day 9, Marcus came home to find me sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my sister sitting across from me and Sandra, the attorney, sitting at the end of the table with a folder in front of her. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at the three of us. He looked at the folder. He said, "Dana, just my name. The way you say a name when you already know it's the last time it will sound like it used to." I said, "Sit down, Marcus." He did not sit down. He said, "Whatever you think you know." I said, $62,000. Priya, the garden venue. The conversation with Derek about spring. He went very still. I had spent 9 days preparing for this moment. I had rehearsed it in the shower, at 3 in the morning, in the car on the way to treatment. I had imagined him crying. I had imagined him angry. I had imagined him falling apart, making excuses, reaching for me, reaching for the version of this story where he was still salvageable. He did none of those things. He pulled out the chair across from me, and he sat down, and he looked at the table between us for a long moment. And then he looked up and he said, with a kind of exhausted honesty that I had not prepared for, "I was scared." My sister said, "Don't." Sandra said nothing. I said, "Keep going." He said, "When you got sick, I know this is wrong. I know how this looks, but I couldn't. I couldn't do the version where I watch you go. I did it with my mother and I swore I would never do it again, and then you got sick and I." He stopped. He put his hands flat on the table. He said, "I started something I shouldn't have, and then it went too far and I couldn't find the way back." I looked at him. 9 years of him. The man who had held my hand through the bad sessions. The man who had also been booking venues. The man who was scared and the man who had moved $62,000, and both of those men were somehow the same man sitting across from me with his hands flat on the table. I said, "You told Derek I wasn't going to make it past spring." He closed his eyes. I said, "You decided for me. You buried me before I was dead." He said, "Yes." One word. The most honest thing he had said to me in months. Here is what I want to tell you about that moment. Here is the thing that I never expected and could not have been prepared for. It did not feel like the movies. It did not feel like victory or vindication or the clean, sharp pleasure of watching someone realize they were caught. It felt like grief. It felt like the specific grief of understanding that the person who hurt you was not a monster. They were a frightened human being who made devastating choices because they did not know how to sit with fear. That does not excuse it. That does not make the $62,000 disappear. That does not unbook the venue. That does not give me back the months I spent feeling guilty for being too sick, too difficult, too much, not knowing that his distance was not about my illness, but about his own inability to face it. But understanding it, really understanding it, was the most complicated thing I had ever felt. Because I had also, in my weaker moments, made choices because I was afraid. I had also, in my sicker moments, pushed people away rather than let them see how scared I was. I had also told myself stories about the future that protected me from the present. I am not the same as what he did. I want to be very clear about that. What he did was a betrayal with a dollar amount and a venue deposit in another woman's name. But the fear underneath it, I recognized that fear. And I hated that I recognized it. Sandra filed the paperwork the following week. Marcus moved out on a Friday. He took his clothes, his laptop, the record player he had owned since college, and the blue phone case with the scratch on the corner. He did not take the photos on the wall. He did not take the coffee maker he had picked out. He left the water glasses with the etched pattern that we had bought on our honeymoon in Portugal. I did not watch him leave. I was at treatment. My sister drove me home after. The house felt different in the way that houses feel different when the person who used to be in them is not anymore. Not empty exactly, but rearranged at some molecular level, like the air was a different composition. I sat on the couch and I held a cup of tea and I thought about the word inevitable. I thought about the fact that a man who loved me had decided I was going to die before anyone else had decided that. I thought about what that meant, not just for him, but for me. What it meant that I had been living in a house with someone who had mentally attended my funeral while I was still trying to figure out if I was going to survive. I want to tell you the cancer went away. I want to tell you the scans came back clean, the numbers turned around, the doctor said the word we had been hoping for. I want to tell you that, and have it be a triumphant ending. Here is what I can actually tell you. The numbers got better, cautiously better. The doctor used the phrase, responding well. Not clear, not done, responding well, which in cancer language means, keep going, keep showing up, keep letting them put the needle in and watching the clock and staring at the bird stain on the ceiling of Bay 7. So I did that. I kept going without Marcus in the chair beside me. I kept going with my sister on Tuesdays and my friend Cassie on Fridays. I kept going with a new attorney and a divorce proceeding that was slower and more expensive and more exhausting than anything I had imagined. I kept going on days when I could not imagine why I was fighting for a future that had just been dismantled. And I want to tell you something about those days. Those days were harder than the cancer. The cancer was a medical fact. It had a protocol. It had a team of people whose job was to fight it alongside me. It had metrics and numbers and a chart on a wall that showed progress. The grief of Marcus was not measurable. It did not have a treatment protocol. It did not respond well. It just sat in me the way grief does, not separate from the recovery but tangled up in it, sharing the same blood, the same sleepless hours, the same mornings when getting out of bed felt like an act of will that should have been rewarded with something more than another day of the same. 6 months after I filed, the divorce was finalized. I was sitting in my car outside the courthouse at 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday when it became official. I had my hands on the wheel and the radio was off and I thought about everything. The first date, the wedding, Portugal, the yellow parking lot lights when he said better and worse and together. I thought about Bay 7. I thought about Priya's voice on the phone. I thought about the garden venue with the white flowers on the arbor. I sat there for 14 minutes. Then I drove home and I made dinner for one and I ate it at the table where 3 people had sat with a folder and changed everything. Marcus and Priya did not end up together. I found this out not from him, but from a mutual friend who mentioned it with the careful casualness of someone not sure whether the information would be welcome. They lasted 5 months after he moved out. The friend did not know why it ended. I did not ask. I am not going to tell you I felt nothing hearing that. I am also not going to tell you I felt good about it. What I felt was something quieter and more honest than either of those options. I felt the particular exhaustion of a story that does not resolve the way you want it to. No clean comeuppance, no clear lesson, no moment where the universe reveals it was paying attention all along. Just 2 people who were afraid. One of whom handled it by staying and fighting. One of whom handled it by leaving before the ending was written. Here is where I have to tell you about the part of myself I am least proud of. There was a moment, 3 weeks after he moved out, 2 weeks before my next scan, on a night when I could not sleep and the house was too quiet and the fear was louder than I had let it be in a long time. There was a moment when I picked up my phone and typed out a message to Marcus. I did not send it. I stared at it for a long time and then I deleted it. The message said, I understand why you were scared. I'm scared too. I just didn't have the option of running. I deleted it because it was true and I didn't want him to have it. But I'm telling you because, and this is the part that will either make you feel seen or make you uncomfortable. I think most of us have typed a message like that and deleted it. To someone who hurt us. Someone we still, in the complicated interior of a 3 a.m. mind, had something for. Not love necessarily. Not forgiveness. Something smaller and more human. A wish that things had been different. A recognition that the person who broke you was also broken. I deleted it because I needed to protect myself. I kept it because I needed to be honest. That tension between protection and honesty, between what we need and what we feel, between the person who hurt us and the human being behind the hurt, that tension does not resolve. That is not a problem with a solution. That is just the condition of being a person who has loved someone and lost them in the worst possible way. My last scan before I finished writing this story showed no new growth. The doctor said the word stable. In cancer language, stable is its own kind of miracle. I am not going to tell you I am healed. I am not going to tell you that betrayal made me stronger, that suffering built character, that I am grateful for what happened because it showed me my own resilience. I have too much respect for the truth to dress this up in growth language. What I will tell you is this. I am still here. I got up every morning of those months, and I went to the hospital, and I sat in Bay 7, and I stared at the bird stain on the ceiling, and I kept going. Not because I am extraordinary. Not because I had some reservoir of strength that other people don't. Because what else do? You keep going because the alternative is that a man who was afraid gets to write the ending of your story. And that is not something I was willing to give him. But here is where I need to stop and ask you something. And I need you to actually think about this before you answer. Marcus was a coward. He handled fear in the worst possible way. He made choices that caused real, measurable harm to a woman who was fighting for her life. There is no version of this story where his behavior is justified. But he was also a man who had watched his mother die, who had lived through that specific kind of helpless grief and carried it forward into a marriage without ever dealing with it, who, when faced with the same loss a second time, did not have the tools to stay. My question is not whether what he did was wrong. It was wrong. My question is this. How much of what we call betrayal is actually just unprocessed fear that found the wrong exit? How many people have left, physically, emotionally, digitally, not because they stopped caring, but because they cared so much they could not stand to watch it end? And here is the part that keeps me up at night. If Marcus had come to me in month 3, if he had sat down across from me and said, "I'm terrified. I watched my mother go through this, and I am falling apart. I don't know if I can do this and I need help," would I have been able to hear it? Would I have had the room to hold his fear alongside my own? I do not know the answer to that question. I have been thinking about it for months, and I still don't know. And I think the not knowing matters. I think the not knowing is the most honest place I can end this story. Not with resolution, not with a verdict on Marcus or on myself, but with a question about what we owe the people we love when they are struggling and what they owe us when we are the ones who need them most. At what point does someone's fear become an excuse they no longer get to use? And at what point does our need for survival, the raw, animal need to keep going, to keep fighting, to refuse the ending someone else wrote for us, at what point does that need make us incapable of holding space for anyone else? I don't think there's a clean answer. I think the people who say there is have never sat in Bay 7 watching a clock. I've been thinking about this for months. I still don't have an answer. Drop your thoughts below. I read every single one.